9.16 is finally out, and we've received the 4 new champions to join Teamfight Tactics, the Hextech Devils. Jayce, Vi, Camille, and Jinx. Each of these units is a different class, though they have the same origin, and I know what you're saying. Drybear, these Hextech units are driving me nuts. They keep shutting down all my items, and it's so hard. I keep hearing this all day long playing ranked and listening to people talk about the Hextech that I wanted to make a video going over what Hextech has done to the meta, how to counter it, how to employ it yourself, and what to look out for, because realistically, up until now, we've been relying very heavily on 2 major components of Teamfight Tactics that Hextech directly counters. Number 1, strong item play. So using the right items into certain builds, like we saw with the Ranger Knight builds, having lots of static shivs, or in the Brawler builds, having really good Morello Nomicons or Guardian Angels to make sure that your big beefy dudes are even harder to kill when they come back to life. But Hextech will shut down items and also punish people that put a whole bunch of units into a cluster like you did with the Ranger Knight build. So because it's an AoE from the orb that gets sent out, if you're clustered together in the corner and a big hex lands on top of your entire group, odds are your match will go very differently than you planned. So in today's Teamfight Tactics video, I'm going to talk all about what Hextech is, what the 4 units are, how to employ them, and how to counter them. The first thing, let's go over what the Hex Origin actually does. If you have 2 Hextech units and you put them onto your board when the round begins, they will target an enemy unit that has an item on them and disable that item for 10 seconds at the start of the round, as well as any units around that unit that have items on them as well. When you have 4 Hextech into the board, you're going to get an even larger area of effect that prevents items from happening on top of that. This goes back to my earlier point of not putting all your units into a big cluster when the enemy is running 4 Hextech. So this breaks up the game quite a bit, and you actually have to think about where your placement is, just like you would if the enemy had a Zephyr or a Blitzcrank. You have to check around for the other boards to see if they have Hextech and place your units accordingly. Now remember, it always targets a unit that has an item. It won't kick it out into a unit that has no item, and you can use this to your advantage. If you know the enemy has 2 or 4 Hextech and you're running a build that desperately relies on items like a fully stacked Draven, a fully stacked Kale, a fully stacked Aurelion Soul, or maybe you're running Gunslingers and you have a fully stacked Tristana or a Jinx and you don't want those items to go away, what you're going to want to do is try to prevent the likelihood of those items being disabled by spreading out your units that have items on them. You don't want to put all your units together that have items, because if they do have Hextech and it hits in an area and disables all your items at once, you're going to be in a really bad spot. Now, you still have to watch out for Blitzcrank on the enemy team, or if they have an assassin comp or anything that's going to disrupt your positioning. But what you can do is start putting out bait units that have an item on them. What I've been doing all day long is putting a single item on a unit, or even a unit like a Yasuo, and placing it far away from my team so that if it randomly gets chosen for the Hextech Hex application, it will only affect that single unit and not all my units all at once. So you have to be careful about where your positioning is and think about what is the most protected unit that needs to keep its items on for the duration of the match and where you should place them. In the background, you'll see a Gunslinger Hextech game that I played where I moved around my units quite a lot to try and punish the Hex that was on the other side and also avoid Hexes that were coming my way. On top of that, Jinx as an addition makes Gunslingers a very viable late game opportunity. Because she is a 4 cost, you can almost treat her like a Draven in that you can make her very hyper carry late game. A couple notes on Jinx: Gunblade does affect her AoE on rockets, and so running Gunblade with her is a really great way to keep her alive and works very well, honestly in my opinion, better than a Bloodthirster, because if you can get those first 2 eliminations and get her to her rocket gun, you'll be able to get a lot of lifesteal off of that. She also benefits just like a Draven or another hyper carry with a rapid fire cannon, and anything you can do to protect her like a Phantom Dancer or a GA along those lines really helps her take off in a bit. But because she is a 4 cost, you really don't want to transition into her too early. It's very difficult to get a Jinx to 2-star before level 7 or even level 8, because just like Draven, you're not likely to get those 4 cost units in the mid stages of the game. So you can actually do a 4 Gunslinger build and then transition into Jinx hypercarry late game just like you would with Blademasters. You can also run Blade of the Ruined King on her and get the double effect that Gangplank would get if you got the Gunslinger plus the Blademaster, which is incredibly powerful. And she makes Gunslingers a powerful combination in the late stages of the game. And in this patch, they also buffed up Misfortune, which is nice, so it makes it even more viable for later stages of the game. She's still not super great if you run her at 1 star, but if you can get her to 2 star, she can actually deal a lot of damage, and she's quite consistent. And in this patch, they also added in Jayce as a Hextech unit. He is a shapeshifter and now allows you to get 6 shapeshifters onto the board, which will give you 120% bonus HP when they transform. It also looks like the bonus HP that shapeshifters get comes from their total HP, including the bonus HP you'd get from items or other buffs. I fully stacked out a Gnar with a bunch of Giant's belts, and then when he shapeshift into his full form, he broke 5,000 HP on his total form, which if you give him a Titanic Hydra or things like that, can be really, really effective. So 6 shapeshifters with the Jayce is very strong. Now, when you're running 6 shapeshifters, in my experience, your 2 hyper carries are going to be Swain and Shyvana. They're the ones doing a lot of the damage. If you have the right items on a Gnar, he can deal a lot of damage as well. But I tried hyper carry Jayce several times, and from what I can tell, Jayce is just not very damaging, and I would treat him more like a Gnar in that you want him to be very tanky and disruptive with a CC. He's not a good target for the hyper carry when you have Shyvana and Swain in the mix that are very, very damaging, strong, powerful units. Camille is the other Hextech added to the game, and she is a Blademaster. She gets us to 7 Blademasters. There is a Blademaster bonus for 9 Blademasters, but this means that you'll need 2 Blades of the Ruined King on non-Blademasters to get there. I don't think 9 Blademasters is actually worth it right now because you'll lose out on so many tank units unless, honestly, you got Blade of the Ruined King on a Braum and a Leona to tank you up front, or a Sejuani or a Cho'Gath. Getting 9 full Blademasters that are actually there to attack doesn't really benefit you too much unless you're just gonna bait out a couple units with Blade of the Ruined King and focus on Draven doing a ton of your damage, or a 3-star Aatrox or things like that. The 9 Blademaster is very elusive. I've done it once, but I actually regretted doing it because I think 6 Blademaster is enough to make someone like a Draven with the right items kill everyone on the board anyway, and you really need those 3 or 4 support units that are gonna CC the enemy team, protect your units, and keep everything going in the right way. And the last unit is Vi for Hextech, and she is actually incredibly powerful. We're seeing a lot of people now in ranked and on live servers running her as a little bit of a brawler carry, and that you can put a Morellos on her when she charges through the enemy team and knocks everybody up. You put a Warmogs on her and she's very, very tanky. Not only that, if you're running 4 Hextech or 2 Hextech with Brawlers, you can get a lot of disruption by turning off items and stopping hyper carries of the enemy team that might chew through your Brawler's max HP. Now, a couple notes on how the Hex applies to specific items. Items like Zeke's Herald that get applied at the beginning of the match will not go off because the Hex gets applied first, so keep that in mind. However, once the Hex does wear off, items like Zeke's will go off on their own for whoever is nearby. So Locket or Zeke's, if anyone is standing near that unit when the Hex wears off, they will get the benefit mid-battle. Just keep in mind that it won't work at the start of the match. On top of this, conversion items that include spatulas, like Blade of the Ruined King or Knight's Vow, will still grant their class bonus. So even if you get Hex at the start of the round and you're a unit, say like a Poppy, and you gave her a Yuumi to make her a sorcerer, she will still be a sorcerer while she's hexed, but she will not gain the stat benefit of that item while she's hexed. Additionally, death items like Redemption and Guardian Angel, if you die while you're hexed, will never go off. So this is a great counter against very death-heavy comps that have the Redemption or the Guardian Angel. Redemption is quite strong now with the 1500 HP boost. However, unfortunately, which personally for me, I don't agree with as much, they increase the duration of the anti-heal for Morellos and red buff to 10 seconds. And so heal items like Redemption are still a little iffy to go. You want to make sure that there's not a whole lot of maybe Gunslingers running red buff or sorcerer builds with Morellonomicon that might prevent your Redemption from getting a lot of benefit from it. So the big thing about Hextech, you want to make sure that you mix it into the right build. For me, what works best is Brawlers with Vi, 6 Shapeshifters with Jayce, of course. And of course, you can run Blademaster with Camille, though as a unit, she is a little hit or miss until you get her to 3-star because she has a little bit lower HP than I would like, though she does have a good amount of armor. And remember, if you are trying to counter an enemy that's running Hex, you have to always be looking at enemy boards to see who's running Hex. Just like you would a Blitzcrank to make sure that your units don't get pulled out of the corner, the Hex is going to be the same thing. And the best way to counter it right now is just to move a unit that has items and spread them out a little bit so that if one of them gets hexed, which you can't prevent, it won't affect all your units at once. It will prevent all your units from having the benefit of an item at the first 10 seconds of that round. And that does it for this Hextech guide. I wanted to get this out really quickly for folks that were having a lot of trouble dealing with Hextech and how it affects how we position our units and what we think about items and what items we place on what units in 9.16. There's still a lot of experimentation with builds going on right now. I'll probably put out a video going over the new top builds because 6 Shapeshifters is really good. 4 Gunslinger, 4 Hextech is also really good with a Jinx hyper carry. There's a lot of new builds that are working well. Brawler still works great if you put a Vi in it and you do Void Brawler with a Cho'Gath carry, that still works fine. Ranger Knight also still works fine. You just have to be careful about Hextech and where you're placing units relative to it, but that still works great. You just have to position different. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. Be sure to check out my other videos on my channel, subscribe, like, and comment. Check me out on my Twitch channel. Check me out on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next one.